I'm Michael Weisdorf, Chief Executive Officer with the Canadian Jewish News. We've put a lot of effort into trying to engage with the younger audience and the younger demographic, those who haven't really engaged with the CGN recently. They don't realize we're back. They say, I absolutely remember reading this on my Booby and Zadie's dining room table or my parents' den. We're trying to bring the Canadian Jewish News into the 21st century. The Canadian Jewish News is a not-for-profit organization, and we're also a registered journalism organization with the CRA. So we can provide tax receipts for donations at any level to help support the Canadian Jewish News and help us continue providing free, high-quality journalism for the Jewish community. You can support us at thecjn.ca/donate. Thank you for your support and for being a part of our journey.
And he said, if I was ever going to do this, I wouldn't want to play an imaginary character named John Davies. I think it'd be fun to be a character named Saul Rubinek. And, oh my God, it was like he'd said the magic words.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Benmergui. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. Mark Leiren-Young is my guest. He is a Canadian playwright, author, journalist, screenwriter, filmmaker, performer, award winner. It's nauseating how much he's done. Absolutely nauseating. The hell is wrong with you? Can't you just stick to one thing?
Oh, that's the first question. That one's perfect.
Yeah, no, it's your mother. It's your mother. Like, could you just do one thing?
Oh no, my mother is, could you do just one thing? And could it be like one thing like journalism that I can explain to all of my friends? not this theater, not the arts, journalism.
Yeah.
I may be the only person whose parents lied and said I was in journalism because it sounded so much more respectable than what I was doing, which was a double major in theater and creative writing.
But you're a journalist as well. You write for Tyee. You've written for all kinds of periodicals and columns over the years.
Maclean's, Time, yeah.
Does it matter? Like, does any of this? Like, is it not all basically storytelling? Is it not all the same thing?
Absolutely.
Well, then that's what you tell your mother.
I try. Now I'm old enough to know that's what I tell my mother. When I was, 18, 19, they all seemed very distinct. I've made a career of blending all of them together. The best of my work blends all of the skill sets.
So I want to talk about Shylock, which is what's getting a lot of heat and attention now. But I want to start with, what is it about you that made you into someone who wanted to tell stories and wanted them to be meaningful, not just tickle people's funny bones or make them cry once in a while, but you really wanted them to have some extra meaning? What is it about you?
I mean, I've got a few different origin stories which actually relate back to being a kid at Tamatora in Vancouver. But why does it have to be meaningful? I don't know. I know that I'm hardwired for it. I know that I've had, like, one of the very first gigs I ever got in animation was for a series called Transformers Beast Wars, which at the time was known as the most violent series on TV. Like, parents' councils in the United States had complained about it. And I'm not great on writing violence, but I was very excited to get a chance to write for a, big deal animated series. And I'd only written one before, or for one other show before. It was a big break. And I kept pitching and I kept missing because I was just like, monster, robots shoot at each other. And my pitch to Beast Wars was, okay, now robots can come back from the dead. Animals can't. I did this pitch that you could never do if you knew what you were doing, right? Like, I broke so many rules of animation, but my pitch for Beast Wars which is, without a doubt, one of the most commercial shows I've ever written for, was Tigatron, one of the good guys, one of the Transformers, decides to move to Canada to avoid the war. This comes after his best friend, a white tiger, an actual white tiger, is killed as collateral damage in a fight between him and the Predacons. So I write the line, Tigatron, a drop of fluid falls from Tigatron's eye. whatever kind of fluid they use, it looks like a tear. I'm writing this in the single most commercial thing I've ever written. I'm expecting them to reject it, with prejudice. And I get this, call back from Los Angeles going, this is fantastic. This is the episode they're going to use to convince parents' councils that Beast Wars is also good. But not only that, I basically start a forest fire. It's the environmentalist pacifist episode of Beast Wars, a show that is known for being ultraviolet. I was also told every once in a while I would run into people who go, you ruined my childhood. You made me cry while I was watching a cartoon. I met the director of that episode who said that I made his career because nobody believed you could make somebody cry while they were watching a Transformers episode.
Wow.
And I wasn't going, oh, let's do that. My
Yeah.
default brain just went, yeah, it's environmental, it's pacifist. I did cheesiest thing that I've ever written, probably in my life. I did a movie of the week. These particular ones are called Woman in Jeopardy movies. That's like the genre. And I was asked to pitch one, and I'm like, it has to be about something. And it has this plot. We'll just go with evil dude plus organ transplants. And at the end of the movie, it's look, let's go with, it's not up there with Playing Shylock in terms of my deeper work.
Right.
But it did, however, pay a lot of bills that year. But that movie ends with a PSA for how many lives can be saved by donating your organs. And that movie's been translated into over 40 languages. And I'm going, there is a part of me that thinks, oh my God, in terms of actual real life impact, is it possible that this cheesy movie has had more impact than anything I've ever written? Because it saved lives.
Right.
There are people around the world who've read the PSA at the end of this
and did it.
cheesy thriller and gone, really? I just have to sign this and I can save 5 lives? I don't know. Like, that just seems to be wired into, it's in the wiring.
Yeah, but it's kind of Trojan horse, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going into avenues that you could have just written what they're used to and what they wanted in both those cases. And they would have gone, yeah, this was fine. We throw it in the mill. But instead, there's this compulsion you had to have it mean something.
Yeah, but I wasn't going, let's be contrary.
Yeah.
I wasn't going, what is the meaning?
It's just part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. I keep thinking of, all the times. I remember I was working in something, and it was somebody was being offered something very commercial, and they were doing fine the way they were. And they for some reason, they asked me, do you think I should do this? And I said, well, I don't think you should sell out when nobody's asking you to. I mean, you're paying your mortgage, you're getting through life. You don't have to sell out. And I was like, he'd never thought of that.
I like that.
Yeah, it's like, wait until you really have to, and then it's perfectly understandable. You write whatever they need because you got to take care of your family. I get it, but don't do it when you don't really have to. Let me ask you about the first time you thought of Merchant of Venice and connected that to being Jewish.
The origin story of me and Merchant of Venice is a really weird one, and I'll try and get it as tight as possible. I wrote a radio drama for our friends at CBC called Dim Sum Diaries. The radio drama was wildly controversial. That's its own story. But in terms of the controversy, there were people who claimed the radio play was racist. I did not love that. There was a year of drama that kind of took over my life. And I wanted to find a way to write about it. I've also really been obsessed with issues around censorship pretty much my entire life. And I remember vividly, I was hanging out my friend Art Norris's farm in Cochrane, Alberta. I'm laying on the floor. I'm reading a book called Reinventing Shakespeare. And I reading it and I start to laugh at this passage. I think this is awesome. It's about a Black actor who is accused of racism for taking the role of Othello in Othello. And I turned to my friend Art and went, I should write a play about that. And Art rolls his eyes and went, have you learned nothing? You just did demonstration. You're still reeling from that. So what are you thinking? He's, why don't you do a Jewish actor in Merchant of Venice? I'm like, I don't know anything about Merchant of Venice. Sure. And like I am looking into Merchant of Venice and go, oh, that would work. So it's my friend Art Norris who went, you should find out about Merchant of Venice. And the more I dug into it, the more I went, oh yeah, this is perfect. This lets me get into everything. But Merchant's been considered toxic a very long time. Long before we started using the word toxic to describe the arts. And it had never been done in Vancouver, which was where I grew up, in my lifetime that I was aware of. So I'd never seen the play. I just read it and went, oh, I like that. I like that. That's interesting. That's interesting. I read everything I could find about it. But I wrote the first iteration of the play Shylock in the early 90s. It really was my response to what happened to me with Dim Sum Diaries. And my interest in Shakespeare and Merchant of Venice was pretty much peripheral. The interest for me was, I love the idea of writing about censorship, but I wanted to choose something that no one could argue was art.
All right, let's stop. Censorship.
Yes.
What is it about that windmill that has you tilting?
I don't know where it starts. I know where I became evangelical about it. And I became evangelical about issues around censorship when I was working for Acclaimed magazine, doing that real journalism thing. And it was really weird, but I mean, I started my career like early 20s. One of my first gigs was I was a West Coast stringer for Maclean's. The then BC bureau chief for Maclean's, her best friends was one of the first people dying of the mystery disease, the disease that was killing queer people, right? And she went, I can't write about this because I'm too close to it. So you, 20-something reporter, fresh out of UVic, can you cover all these stories, which turned from one story into a whole bunch of cover stories. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, how do I find out what is going on in the gay community of Vancouver? I thought I will go to the gay and lesbian bookstore, Little Sisters in downtown Vancouver, in Davie Street. And I remember meeting the owners at Little Sisters going, walk me through this. What do I need to know? How is the community dealing with this? And Jim Diva, who ran Little Sisters, brings out a magazine from the States, maybe in The Advocate, and shows me all of these blacked out passages. And you can sort of read through them if you're using like a light or a flashlight and see what they've blacked out. And what had been blacked out by the good folks at Canada Customs were any and all references to men wearing condoms to prevent this mysterious disease. And I realized that essentially censorship in Canada had and has a body count. That because Canada Customs was not prepared to, I think the official laws around it came down to Canada Customs was not allowing anything in that would imply the existence of anal sex.
Right.
So they blacked out any reference to men's condoms. And this included articles on men's health, saying there's this disease, we don't know how to prevent it, but we think condoms might do it. We think it might be a bodily fluids thing. And, this is before AIDS had a name. And the idea that censorship in Canada had a body count, I've just never been able to shake that.
Right.
And I've been the free expression representative on Playwrights Union of Canada, Playwrights Guild of Canada, Penn Canada, Writers Union of Canada. I served on the Free Expression Committee for the Book and Periodical Council of Canada 20-something years. Sometimes when I was affiliated with the writers organization, sometimes just because I was institutional memory. But it all came from there. Like
Right. Fascinating.
The attitude towards it came from there. The passion came from there.
I don't live in a very, very Jewish world. What I see as my role at the CJN, in part, is having this bigger picture of how society at large sees Jews and being kind of prepared to understand it. So on October 16th, 2023, I wrote a column really just asking, where would a Jew not be considered a settler? This was at a moment where Jews were being accused not only of being settlers anywhere in Israel, not specifically in the West Bank, and also anywhere in North America, and basically just looking at this question of where on earth is there a consensus that Jews can live and that that's fine. Sometimes the answer isn't a place, but it is rather that there are people who think Jews should not live. My name is Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, and I'm the opinion editor at the Canadian Jewish News. To support this kind of work, make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
All right, so how did Shylock, you wrote in the 90s, how did it resurface in your life to become something we're watching today with Saul Rubinek?
Wildest thing that happened to me during the pandemic was I got a call. The playwright Paul Ledoux said, I've been having conversations with Saul Rubinek, who of course I'd heard of. When people in Toronto had said, we're thinking of doing your play Shylock, who do you think would be a great Shylock? Saul was one of the names I would always put at the top of the list. I would go, I turned down multiple productions of the original Shylock in Toronto because they all seemed a little like, yeah, this will be okay. I've got a play that's gone around the world. Like that play went everywhere for me. It's been translated to multiple languages, done over, it's been done since the 90s. And there's never been a professional run in Toronto. And I've just never had anybody hit me with a production that I was okay with. Because of the nature of that play, I've never allowed amateur rights out, which is a weird thing to do for a playwright. But I've never been comfortable with amateur productions of that play because audiences don't know the difference, and I'll wear the bad amateur production. So Saul and Paul Ledoux are talking over the summer during the pandemic, and apparently Paul, I found this out when I was just there, Paul hears Saul talking about Edward de Vere, who he was obsessed with, and Merchant of Venice, and says, who knows a lot about Merchant of Venice? My friend Mark. He's written this play, Shylock. And I'm going, oh, I could talk to Saul Rubinek about Shylock. This is really cool. But basically, he said, do you mind if I give Saul your number and he can talk to you about Shylock? Heck yeah. So I'd actually been floating Saul around for the screen version of another stage play I wrote called Bar Mitzvah Boy. And so I'm like, this is just serendipity. I'm going to talk to him about Bar Mitzvah Boy. And when I'm sharing Shylock with him. So we connect. I send him both plays. He reads Bar Mitzvah Boy. That one doesn't connect for him. He reads Shylock. We're talking about it. And he said, really like that play. But, it's not really about Merchant of Venice. I'm like, yeah, nothing to do with Merchant of Venice for me. It was about this other thing. And he said, if I was ever going to do this, I wouldn't want to play an imaginary character named John Davies. I think it'd be fun to be a character named Saul Rubinek. And, oh my God, it was like he'd said the magic words. And he just sort of laughed and went, I'd want the character to be Saul Rubinek. And I'm like, that would be amazing. Because like my happiest place as a writer is blending fact and fiction. If I can get meta, I'm so there. And confusing an audience, most of my best pieces have left audiences going, did that really happen? And I'm basically we kept having this conversation. I'm like, you're serious, but you would be willing to do this and blend your life into this play. And, we had the conversation. It was entertaining. It was COVID. I didn't take it very seriously. And next thing I know, Saul's phoning me and going, yeah, I've got this producer friend and he's willing to cut you a check so you could write this new play where I am the actor playing Shylock. And I said, okay, that's fantastic. Can you leave me alone for a little bit? And I took the commission and went, I must now study this man. And I listened to every single interview with Saul. I watched every single YouTube video where Saul was interviewed. And I wrote a draft of this play where I blended his opinions, his actual biography. If he had a particular way of starting and stopping a sentence, I put that in. If he had a phrase he went back to, a vocal tick, all of it, I built that into the script. And I thought, I have no idea if he's going to love this or hate this, but this I've got to work. I've got to hear his voice. I've got to write the entire thing in his voice and blend in his passions and his phrasings and his go-to anecdotes. And I said this to him, and next thing I know, we're having real discussions about doing this play. And, when I got the commission during the pandemic, I didn't know there was ever going to be theater again anywhere. So
Yeah.
I had time to play, right? I mean, I had productions of my other play, Bar Mitzvah Boy, being shut down everywhere. I was watching full productions turn into really cheeseball Zoom shows.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Shot with
yeah.
no budget, where the actors had to stay 6 feet away from each other. So, but I thought solo show, maybe something will happen with this solo show.
So where's the Shylock in I know Saul, so I know where I could see the Saul. And I know that I grew up with the idea that it was a kind of a fact for people that Shylock as a trope is anti-Semitic, that it's like Fagin in Oliver. He's the
Glad you're mentioning Fagin. I'm so with you there. Yeah.
yeah, so the avaristic, heartless Jew who wants to take. How did you? What is your Shylock, and what do you want us to know about Shylock through Saul struggling with Shylock?
Well, when I first explored Shylock, the most important thing for me, this is what I did the original play, was I had to be unambiguous. The character had to be unambiguous on stage and start from the premise, Shylock is an anti-Semitic caricature, and so what? We're doing it anyway. It's a work of art. Because I wanted to have the discussion about, do you censor things? That was, so I had to come down unequivocally on that. With this version of Shylock, I get more into the nuance of it, and is there value in having this conversation? I mean, that's in the original as well, but I'm more reluctant to go, you can't do this. And I start from the premise, one of the few things in the play that's entirely fictionalized is that Saul's dad desperately wanted to play Shylock. We don't know that he did. We kind of assume that he did because Saul's dad was an actor in the Yiddish theater, but that this was Saul's dream, that he always wanted to play Shylock. Right. That was the one fiction I went, you have to accept this. I was kind of adamant on this has to be, this has to be real.
You wanted nuance. It sounds like you were moving from black and white to gray.
Yes, absolutely.
So what made you go towards gray? Age and wisdom, or a lightning bolt? What was it that?
No, what made me go towards gray is the world we're freaking in, man. I wanted people to be able to argue about it. I didn't want to take a side that didn't allow for argument. And I really wanted to leave. I just wanted to drop so many questions in that audience and have so much fun with them going, maybe you should do it. Maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe, I really get into it. And part of it with this is looking at how and why things get censored and shut down today, and looking at, the world we're in with who's allowed to play which role. And what was more fascinating to me with this in 2024 and in 2022, when I finished the draft, was, let's say this is a character who shouldn't be played. If there's anyone who should be allowed to be on stage dressed as a chassid, doing Shylock with a Yiddish accent, isn't it an actor whose grandfather went to the gas chambers dressed as a chassid, whose father was an actor in the Yiddish theater, who wanted to play Shylock? I basically wanted to put those knots on stage. I wanted people to try and untangle that one. So that's where it came from, was going, wherever you want to go with this script, if there's anyone in the world who's allowed to be doing this play at this time, wouldn't it be Saul Rubinek?
Right.
Or at least my fictional Saul Rubinek, or for that matter, the real Saul Rubinek, because damn, does he nail that role? Oh, like I mean, I've been trying to explain to people early on. I'm really reluctant to sell my own stuff to friends. I'm way past that phase of my life. You want to see the show, great, see the show. But I'm no longer the guy going, you have to see the show because it's my show. With this one, I'm going, you have to see the show because just seeing Saul do Shakespeare's Shylock is worth the price of admission. If you think everything that I say is boring, just seeing Saul do Have Not a Jew Eyes is worth the ticket price. He's just astonishing.
What is, in this production, what does it, I know you're talking about or you wanted it because of where we're at in the world, but what about as Jewish people, and with anti-Semitism and all the pain and just the sad situation everything seems to be in for what it is to say I'm Jewish. What do you get now when you see this production about Judaism and about where we are?
That has been the wildest ride with this, because when I finished this in 2022, I remember when I finished Bar Mitzvah Boy years ago going, well, anti-Semitism is no longer like, much a big part of my life. It springs up occasionally. It sprung up more than I would have expected. But because I'd really thought it had kind of vanished. And then every once in a while I'd step into something and go, oh, it really hasn't quite vanished yet. But 2022, I was not thinking of anti-Semitism as a, big thing to worry about. And I thought, I think I'm done writing Jewish stuff. I actually thought that before I connected with Saul. I said everything I had to say in Bar Mitzvah Boy. And we suddenly were opening a play in 2024. And the most intense discussions around the script came down to Saul and the director, Mark Leiren-Young, going, how do we not break this script and still acknowledge this is an utterly different world than the one we completed it in? 2022 was an utterly different world for Jews, as we both know. And that's been fascinating. How do we address that without changing everything we're doing with the play? And that basically going, all right, here's how we're going to take it. We're just going to be very clearly in this world without getting into too many specifics. And part of not getting into too many specifics came down to, we were opening during the U.S. election, knowing that absolutely anything could and did happen. Right. So I realized things were going to shift in the zeitgeist during the run of the play. Right. Like anything could happen during the run of the play. We were in rehearsals on the anniversary of October 7th. We were in rehearsals. I mean, I skipped rehearsals to go to services for Rosh Hashanah at a huge shul in Toronto. don't know if I'd ever been in a shul that big. You know, I was skipping rehearsals for Yom Kippur. This was the world we were doing the play in. So being aware of that has been wild, and going, all right, how's the audience going to respond in 2024? How are, what is this going to be like? It's been a ride.
And what are you hearing from people who've seen the show?
It's been astonishing. I mean, it just seems to be opening up the kind of conversations you'd sort of dream of in terms of how people are reacting, because it's getting them thinking about where we're at and how we deal with it. I'm trying to think of any there's no specific that's coming to mind, of course, as we're talking about this. The second you're done with me, I'll go, I should have told them that. I've got this great anecdote. But
but okay, are you? Where now? So one of the things that occurred for me when all this nonsense, horribleness happens, was I spent my whole life not wanting to be the guy looking under every rock for an anti-Semite, right?
Yeah,
I didn't want it to define who I am. I didn't want that kind of defensive antagonism in my life. Looking for a fight, none of it. And now, I'm aware that I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I had just been on a retreat, and at one point, some of us were asked to tell a story in a short amount of time. And I had no idea what I was going to say, because I never do. And I got up because they said, "You're next." I said, No, I didn't sign up for the storytelling. And they're like, No, you're next. I was like, okay. So I get up and I look at all 90 Jewish men who've been on this retreat together, and I say, why do they hate us? Like, why do they hate us so much? What have we done? Like, I'm not talking about Israel. I'm talking about 2,000 years of being Jewish. What did we do? And all the men were just looking, and we were all kind of nodding, like, that is the question. And then I said, but I don't want this to define who I am. I don't want to become an exceptionalist. We're better, that's why they hate us. We're this, that's why they hate, all that nonsense. And being called Christ killer for 2,000 years doesn't help. Having Shylock written into a script doesn't help. Having Fagin written into a Charles Dickens script doesn't help. Don't you come here? It doesn't help. It doesn't help. But I still don't have an answer, but I do know that I'm not going to let this make me hide under a rock myself, that I have to be able to be myself and be proud of my journey, whatever it is. And I wonder, having done this, and the interesting thing to me about what you've done is you wrote a play already that you thought, that's my play. And then you rewrite a play with Saul, and now October 7th happens, and you have the play, and it's on, and the world is upside down. Where are you at in your Jewish journey in this particular moment?
it's really interesting. It hit me the other day. I was invited to give a talk about Shylock at my synagogue in Victoria, Congregation Emmanuel. It's the oldest continuously operating synagogue, the oldest synagogue in Canada that is still in operation. I got there's an older one in Montreal that's now just a historic building. And the year before October 7th, I was at a Kristallnacht event at that shul, and there was a visible police presence outside. And I realized I've spent my entire life knowing that going to synagogue was not a safe thing to do. There's never been a time in my life when I was a little kid, I knew where the exits were. As a little kid, before I was bar mitzvahed, I knew exactly where the exits were if somebody threw a bomb into the shul or started shooting the shul. That is not a typical Canadian reality. And I remember looking at the very visible police cruiser in front of the synagogue, and for the first time in my entire life getting angry about it. instead of going, oh, isn't it cool? The police are there. I was like, police aren't outside of anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like, and this is Victoria. This is one of the most chill places in the universe. And we have to have a police cruiser outside for an event. And I can't stress enough, before October 7th. So, yeah, in terms of my Jewish journey, it's kind of like just being out there and being, openly Jewish has been a big part of it. And I mean, some of that was, we were joking about my mom earlier when we kicked this off. Some of that came down to the fact that my grandparents, who I adored, did not care if I was in any media except for the Jewish Western Bulletin. So I became a very proudly out Jew in Vancouver in my 20s and 30s, early on in my career, because I had Peter C. Newman write about my comedy act in Maclean's. My grandparents were like, I had some of the best press you could ask for in the country. My grandparents were like, the Jewish Western Bulletin would do a little blurb saying, Mark did this. They're like, I was talking about this with the ladies at Mahjong. Right? That was the nachas,
Yeah.
So I was just like, fine. Anytime I get invited to do a Jewish thing, I will do that because it will make them happy.
Right.
So I've always been public, weirdly starting there. But yeah, my Jewish journey is now just being out and going.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I'm here.
It fits with the censorship idea. You can't censor me either, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't, right? My identity, whatever that part of my identity is, I'm not going to just shut it down so that you're okay. I mean, there's not a police cruiser outside a United Church bake sale, but there is one outside a mosque and a synagogue, and sometimes a Hindu or Sikh temple. So, there's still a lot going on. There's that old thing of the guy sitting on the bench with Jesus and saying, how could you, if you're God, how could you let this happen? How could you have wars and atrocities and disease in children? How could you do this? And how could you just let all this horrible stuff happen? And Jesus looks at him and goes, it's funny. I was just about to ask you the same question.
Nice.
Right. And so we have a personal responsibility to be our best self. But we also, you as an artist, have a responsibility to have a voice and not shut down a voice because, I don't know. So you do a Transformers script, but you think, but where's the heart and soul in this story? And then they're like, typical LA, they're like, wow, man, we never even thought of that. This is so cool. We're doing it. So I love it. If you want Shylock to be something that people gather something from, what is it you want from the audience members as they leave the show?
It's interesting. As a player who likes messing with people's heads, I just heard Saul and I were talking the other day. He said he's had people in the audience come up to him because the premise of the show is that we haven't done any of the typical sales stuff where I break it down. But the premise of the show is that a production of Merchant of Venice has been canceled. The actors find out during intermission, and the actor playing Shylock, Saul Rubinek, comes out and goes, I just found out that we're supposed to be canceled after tonight. Screw that, I'm canceling us now, and does a talk back. When the original version of this happened, multiple people in every audience were like, they really canceled Merchant? Which to me was like the ultimate compliment, was that people had confused the fact with the fiction. And I remember when this played at San Diego Repertory Theater, what was in rep with Merchant, telling the artistic director, and he sort of pats me on the head and goes, yeah, you're Canadian. And then I'm there opening night and I'm watching this heated argument with 4 people after the show. And he leaves the theater and comes back. And I said, what was that about? He said, they were convinced that we'd actually canceled Merchant of Venice after watching your show. And he said they were determined to show me on the poster outside my theater that it said canceled because they'd somehow seen this in their head. And I never imagined it with this iteration of Shylock. And Saul said he's having multiple people in the lobby afterwards saying, so what was the show we were supposed to see tonight? That was amazing. What was can you tell me about the show that was canceled? You're like, let's do a show that was canceled. So that to me is the ultimate. But beyond that, it is, I want you to come out and just be talking about it for days. That would make me really happy. To me, when I write theater, I mean, I've written stuff that's just supposed to be fun. But when I write something like this, I hope you're arguing with somebody about it a month from now. Right. I've met people who said, my husband and I saw your original play Shylock. We get emails or letters, a year later, it's like, we are still discussing. I'm like, oh, I win. If I'm taking up space in your head, that's fantastic. If you're still thinking about the ideas, that's fantastic.
Rent free.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want people thinking about it. That's happiness for me.
Beautiful. Thanks for your time, Mark. I really appreciate it. It's good to reconnect. Haven't talked to you in I don't know how long.
Oh, smart ass, I think. It's been ages. Thank you so much for doing this. It really is great to see you. And I've always wanted to be interviewed by you, so this is fantastic.
There you go. We did it. It's done. We can talk about it a year from now.
Fantastic. All right.
You take care of yourself.
You too.
Mark Leiren-Young, playwright, journalist, author, nice guy, smart guy, sensitive guy. Shylock, his production in Toronto with Saul Rubinek, and I'm sure if Saul's game, then it'll be in some other places too. And the good Lord will, as Tommy Hunter used to say. I'm Ralph Benmergui. This is Not That Kind of Rabbi. You take care of each other, okay? And we'll talk soon. Bye.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.